Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ed Selich. I'm president of Speak Up Newport. I'd like to welcome you to our fourth webinar in our series of programs that we're presenting during the current pandemic crisis. The Speak Up Newport board is continuing our 39-year tradition of presenting monthly programs of community interest, now via the Zoom webinars. If you missed our first three and would like to see them, you can go to our website, www.speakupnewport.com, to view them. Speak Up Newport is your forum for discussion of civic issues. We sponsor 10 programs a year. We also sponsor the Mayor's Dinner. In 2021 will be our 40th year. And we award four $3,000 scholarships to Corona Del Mar and Newport Harbor seniors each year. This year we have awarded scholarships. Lily Bozes from Newport Harbor will go first, Rhett Farmer from Newport Harbor, then Thomas Glessing from Corona Del Mar, and Madison Fife from Corona Del Mar. So let's get started with Lily. And Lily, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Lily Bozes, and I just graduated from Newport Harbor, and I'm going to Loyola Marymount University, and as of right now, I'm an undeclared business major, so just want to wait out and see specifically what in business I want to major in, but I also plan on minoring in psychology.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lily. Rhett, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Alrighty, my name is Rhett Farmer, just graduated from Newport Harbor. I'm heading off to UCLA to study biochemistry, going down the pre-med track. And I'm planning to play lacrosse there as well. And I'm grateful for this experience.
Thank you, Rhett. Thomas, how about you?
Hello, my name is Thomas Glessing. I'm going to Cal Poly next year. I'm from Corona Del Mar High School. I just graduated. I'm going to be majoring in forestry and hopefully a focus on wildland fire and fuels management. I'm going to want to be a firefighter when I'm older. So right now I'm in the summers, I'm going to work for the city of Laguna Beach as an ocean lifeguard. And I plan on having a great life. And I'm really stoked that Speak Up Newport gifted me a scholarship.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate that. Our last awardee is Madison. Are you online, Madison? I don't think she is. She had a doctor's appointment that she was probably unable to reschedule. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Madison. She graduated from Corona Del Mar. She's going to attend the University of Georgia. And Maddie and her classmates lost a friend, Patrick, to suicide for mental illness last year. It was a devastating experience for her. So the family started Patty's Purpose Foundation, which she's been very involved with. She understands the importance of making others aware of this disease and the need for education and understanding, and she wants to help others. So I'm sure she'll go on to have a great college degree as well as our other students will here. And I want to congratulate all of you for your high school accomplishments and wish you the best in your college careers. And you guys are representative of your generation, and I think our future is in good hands. So thanks a lot for attending our webinar today and introducing yourselves. We appreciate that. So this afternoon, we have a program on how will the 2020-2021 Newport Beach City budget affect our quality of life. Our panelists are Grace Lueng, the Newport Beach City Manager, and Dan Matusiewicz, the City Finance Director and Treasurer. Now, if you want to ask questions, please click on the chat button at the bottom of the screen and type in a question, and you can do that at any time during the program. And with that, I'd like to now introduce our moderator, Speak Up board member, Richard Lewers. Richard.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very, very much for joining us for this important issue regarding the City of Newport Beach's budget for 2021 and beyond. We have two great presenters today. First is our city manager. Grace joined the City of Newport Beach as its city manager in September of 2018. She came to us from the city of Irvine, where she headed up the finance department for the city for a number of years and was the go-to person regarding finance for the city of Irvine. a very sought after set of accomplishments for our city going forward. So we are very pleased to have Grace with us, particularly in these difficult times. Our second presenter is Dan M., commonly referred to. And Dan has been with the city since 1992. And Dan has worked in the city finance department for a number of years. And he became the finance director in 2012 and has operated as such ever since. He brings with a great deal of experience as well, not only with the city of Newport Beach, but prior to the city, he was with a firm that audited local governments. So to say that these two have a very strong acumen relative to municipal finance would be an understatement. We're very, very pleased to have both of these people as our panelists today, and we look forward to their presentation relative to the city's financial condition. So let's start with Grace, and we'll go from there. How do you see things looking for the city for the future?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Richard. And Ed, I really appreciate you inviting us to talk about the city's budget and what we're going through right now. It's such an unprecedented time right now that we're in. And certainly this budget process, despite my many, many years in municipal finance, previous to Irvine, I was with Sunnyvale for almost 18 years in their finance department. I will say, and I think Dan also probably concurs throughout his long career too, this has been a very unusual kind of historical time period that we're going through now. And really as part of developing this budget and putting this together during this unprecedented time. Has really been quite a challenge, and I have to really put my hats off to our just terrific staff and their in-depth experience and expertise to get us through all of this. So we have a presentation, and I'm going to just take that first slide of the overview slide. So I want to start by saying that we do have a balanced budget. We're required to have one, and we knew we would. And really, I think I really want to impress upon the audience, to folks listening in, that I think we're so very fortunate in Newport Beach with the resources that we have, the planning and foresight that is done, that we really have a vast array of tools kind of in our tool bag to manage through a crisis, of this global pandemic, that we're in a much better place than many other cities in getting through all this. So that we are kind of, to your initial question, how are we doing? I think with all the circumstances under which we're doing very well at this point in time. And fortunately, we have a lot, having the resources that we do, we can take the time to, provides us the luxury of the time to develop our solutions and develop a good long-term strategies with that together, and we don't have to be knee-jerk about it. So we do have a balanced budget in this fiscal year that we just started. Dan will go into a lot more detail about how we came about and our numbers there. We were facing our initial budget gap, was looking for this current fiscal year, 33 million. That was on top of 13 million that we anticipated of a shortfall for the last fiscal year that just ended. Because as you recall, when all of the COVID pandemic actions that were taking place really took place in March, that really immediately impacted the fiscal year at that point. So we had to deal with that. And then looking into this year that we're in now, we were looking at 33 million. And really, our staff did an excellent job kind of working together with our finance committee especially, and then our city council, of developing a real tiered strategy into looking and addressing that shortfall. And I think it's a really thoughtful approach that we look at things that have the least impact first and get those cuts in place, and then go into the next tiers as we get more information and see more of the data, that we add on the layers. And then hopefully if things turn out better, then you can also reverse some of those actions, kind of in a reverse direction as well. So I think it's a really thoughtful approach that we've laid out, that we can really be addressing what is going to be a situation that we'll have to be constantly adapting to. And then what will also be highlighted in this presentation that Dan will get into detail on is just, we're very mindful. I think one of the hallmarks here in this city with the long-term planning is to ensure that we have our critical infrastructure maintained well, and developing and maintaining and ensuring that we have the funding to do so and maintain that. We actually, during all this time period, we also this year added a 5-year capital improvement project plan that I think helps with our long-term planning here. And also maintaining our schedule to pay down our unfunded pension liability, which we know is a strong goal of our city council that we want to continue. And then because budgeting is so fun, we're going to continue to do it. We will be looking at the budget after the first quarter with our finance committee and our city council to continue to make the adjustments and adapt as we move along. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan at this point to kind of go walk through some of the details of how we got to where we are.
Well, thank you, Grace. As you know, COVID-19 really was a curveball for us, and I think the rest of the world felt a significant blow to the national and global economies. As Grace mentioned, for fiscal year 1920, mid-cycle, we realized we weren't going to meet our 1920 revenue estimates, so we reduced our revenue estimates by $13.5 million in 1920, and then another 19.5 on top of the 13.5 reduction in revenues. So it's about a $33 million downturn, but in total it was, close to 41.5 lower than our pre-COVID estimate. So when we started the budget, this was pre-COVID, we were much more optimistic about our revenues looking forward. And so really, I mean, once we had started the process, we were, had most of the expenditures and budget built. We had to turn around and cover almost a $41.5 million gap in total. So what makes COVID budgeting so difficult is that, really no one knows how long this pandemic is going to last. I mean, we know that it's likely to have long-term impacts on all aspects of our community or society, such as economic growth, labor market dynamics, productivity growth, international cooperation. We're seeing some backpedaling there, deglobalization. We realize, supply chains were severely upended, and I think we're probably starting to rethink, do we want to be reliant on a global supply chain when we have difficult times such as this? It just makes it that much more difficult to keep supply chains going. It's surely impacting some of the society more so than others. So I anticipate more income inequality. And then, the big question is, how is it going to change corporate and consumer behavior moving forward? So all these impacts make it really difficult to predict as, the pandemic continues to evolve. And some of the slides I wanted to just show you are possible scenarios. This was the kind of the if you're familiar with the hammer and the dance philosophy, there were times where we feel comfortable about opening up. There may be times where we may have to close down. And so it may be cyclical, but you can see this is scenario one, and it's looking at impacts through January 22. A more serious, I think, thing that was a concern early on is there going to be a resurgence in the fall and cause another shutdown is something that I think we're all concerned about. And I think what we, outside of a 30 to 60 to 90 day event, thinking that, well, this is going to be a quick shock to the system and then we'll get back to normal. That didn't happen. Probably the best case scenario now is if we can get, all the states dancing in concert with each other, that we maybe will get to a slow burn, but it's still likely to take some time. But the difficulty in budgeting is that we don't know what scenario we're looking at, and we really don't know how long and how deep this is going to impact the economy. But there is some reason to have optimism. Now, with a lot of caveats, you've probably heard a lot that this is the best quarter in 2 decades, but I need to provide some context to that, as well as not all industries are bouncing back and recovering. You see the tech-heavy NASDAQ represented by the U.S. composite in that quarter earned 29%. Of course, that's measuring from the trough and where we are today. But nonetheless, there is optimism, and it was a very big comeback this quarter. But to set some context, if we step back and look where we were in January, you can see the S&P 500, we're still 2.65% below where we were in January. So not quite as optimistic, but again, the tech-heavy companies and the NASDAQ, did much better. And if, let's take one more step back and say, okay, from the beginning of the fiscal year, the NASDAQ did much better than all the other indices. And part of how you explain that is really the basket of goods that are in the NASDAQ. Think of Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. That makes up about 40%. Those companies make up about 40% of NASDAQ, whereas in the S&P 500, which is a broader picture of the economy, probably more represented, only has 20% of those high-tech companies. So that, and then there's that notion that some of the transition to technology, which was whether it's Zoom meetings or online banking or online currency, all of those were thought that this pandemic really advanced the acceleration of the movement towards tech solutions by about 10 years. So that's why we're seeing it higher on the NASDAQ composite. The other thing is, unlike news that reports on what happened today or what happened in the last couple days or week, the market is very forward-looking, and so those that own those large companies are looking at 5 to 10 years and saying, okay, well, this will resolve itself, but these still have long-term earnings potential. So there is that difference, and it's not probably a good representative sample of consumer sentiment across the board, because as you know, the stock market, 90% of the stock market is owned by probably the top 9% of wealthy Americans. So some of those aren't as impacted, and they're probably a little bit more optimistic on those long, can wait the storm out and still feel optimistic about those investments in large. So if you were to, just say, hey, we're doing great, what's happening? You have to temper those expectations. The other is when we look at a July through June look, when you think about our CalPERS investment portfolio, I want to temper our expectations to say, well, it's not going to look like the NASDAQ index. It's the stock component will probably, the earnings on their stock will be closer to this 5.6%. But keep in mind, their portfolio is 60% stocks, 40% fixed income. And as we know, the fixed income has been taking a beating in terms of yield. Something in the 4.5% range may be more realistic. And PERS plans to announce their earnings, I believe, the week of the 20th of July. So I'll have more to report out then officially. But enough about the optimism in the stock market. And keep in mind, these are forward-looking speculation, and we know from the early 90s, Greenspan coined this saying, which was the over-exuberance in that speculation. But I don't think we're seeing that. Prices are high, and it's been confusing. So it's not wouldn't put all your money that this is the economy is going to bounce back like this for some of the reasons I stated before. I also want to point out there are differences in the economics in cities. So the three top revenue sources are property tax, sales tax, and transient occupancy tax, with sales tax and transient occupancy tax being the most volatile. So when you look at the portfolio of revenues between these four cities, you can see Anaheim is much more susceptible to the volatility in revenues, second by Costa Mesa, who is much more sales tax dependent, Irvine, and we're very fortunate that property tax is the city of Newport Beach's #1 source of revenue. As we know, 80% of it is residential property that is driving a $60 billion market. And fortunately, the housing market is holding firm. It's very unlike the Great Recession. Thus far, values, while we've seen a reduction in the turnover, but the prices are holding. So that's been good news for the city of Newport Beach. So one thing that came on early on, this was something that came out in February. This was the Legislative Analyst Office, is an independent branch of the state of California that looks at problems that might arise. And so prior to COVID, they had some criticisms that the governor's budget essentially enacted a budget that budgeted enacted spending appropriations all the way up to their revenue estimates, and once you have those spending plans in place, not all of them are easy to roll back, especially if they've been formalized or if they're part of a bargaining unit. So this is something I use for a public policy presentation at UC Irvine, but neither of us knew really that this was going to be so prophetic in terms of what a good criticism. And so, their article goes on to say, well, by not budgeting 100% of your revenues, you can have an annual surplus, and you can use part of that annual surplus to build a reserve. And that's what Governor Brown was doing for several years, building up a reserve. And it's not far off from the philosophy the city uses as well. And so you can take some of the money that's been set aside in reserves or the annual surplus and apply those to, when there's a sudden and sharp decline in revenues, that you don't have to turn to cut baseline spending. And where we see some of our neighbors having to drastically cut employees right away, we have more, the way we build our budget, we have more time to react and go through a more thoughtful process at how, if this current imbalance is it one time? Is it going to be recurring? Is it do we have to prepare for a structural issue? And that's where we're going to be really focusing our efforts is how will we restructure our budget? Assume, if these the current situation and revenues continue to persist beyond this fiscal year, fiscal year 2021 and into 21-22. So we'll be monitoring the 2021 budget very closely and building up backup plans for 21-22 as well. And there could possibly be further cuts that may be necessary even in the 2021 budget.
Dan?
But none so far. Go ahead.
I was just going to add, I think, what's so critical and important, I think, is that fiscal discipline, particularly when times are good. And a lot of times that's so hard to do. But I think there's a good history here and that discipline set in place, from the council on down. And that really shows that we're now in a good place when times, when we have these sudden drops in our revenues that we're able to manage through. But it's that important discipline during the good times that's in place.
Yeah, and so this slide demonstrates some of the problem. So if you look at 18-19, our operating revenues were far exceeded our operating expenditures. So you can see that our operating revenues in 18-19 were 229 million. Operating expenditures were 208. But to get to Grace's point about savings in good time, you can see that 34 million were used to transfer out into other funds, other strategic master plans that we use, and I'll touch on those a little bit later. But as we our revenue estimate in 1920 was over 200, I think it was 234 million-ish, and we had to cut it down by 13.5. So we're now faced with $219 million budget, and we enacted some cuts to our current operating environment that we hope to end the year with a a surplus of $12 million without even touching our contingency reserve. So that's up above and beyond our annual surpluses up here that we would tend to allocate. But this was the problem. So that we were trying, the nut that we were trying to crack. Now, looking into 2021, our revenues declined another 19.5 million, and yet our operating expenditures were already in the $230 million range. So, how did we crack that nut? So we'll get to that. So outside of the contingency reserve and post 2009, we started to look and say, well, gosh, are our contingency reserves enough for these black swan events? Or, maybe that's not the measure. Maybe we need to analyze what are the risks that we have. So we went through an extensive risk study, and we decided to increase our contingency reserve from, I believe it was around 12 to 15% to about 25%. So that blue bar is our increase in the contingency reserve. But at the same time, we were setting aside for the perpetual replacement of our facilities. We've been setting aside money for capital, for equipment replacement. We've been setting aside money for workers' compensation, and then started a facilities master plan, as well as a harbor and beaches plan that we started up right about 2013, and started to build up money for some of those bigger projects. So it's more than the 50 million. And you could, you'll see that those reserves and the savings in good times, as well as not budgeting 100% of our expenditures each year, or our revenue estimates, allowed us to, they were critical and able to balance the budget quickly without having to react too drastically. So some of the other funds, so our normal our transfer pattern is about $24 million that we would, $24 million that we would transfer out to various, either the neighborhood enhancement fund, the facilities financial plan, the harbor and beaches plan, and they had some pretty healthy balances. So what we're able to do, one of the things is take a pause on some of those savings plans when times were good, and now we were able to, so we're saving less towards those programs, and put a pause, but not put those reserves in jeopardy. But they will need to be replenished, and that is a plan that we'll be working on this year. And so when we look at the tiered cuts, as I mentioned, what's not on here is that we cut a little over 4 million in 1920, but for 2021, we made some cursory operating cuts to help bridge the gap of about 2.9 million. We've got a temporary hiring freeze, or some might call it vacancy control. So Grace is being very judicious about which positions that through attrition become vacated, which ones we refill. And we think we'll be able to recoup at least $2 million in vacant positions. And then we did defer some of the funding, as well as capital projects of about 21 million. And we reduced ISF, our internal service fund reductions, by another 5. We did dip into our contingency reserve, just as the state did, of about 2.3 million, but cumulatively, that's how we bridged the gap to get to 33.2 million, without actually touching the service level, any service level cuts thus far. Grace, did you want to add anything here?
No, well, I'll just add real quickly. I think we have this set up so that we'll be looking at how we can do the surface level cuts, over these next few months as we understand the data further. But the way that the tiering is set up, I think the first things in place, we would go back the opposite way. So we get the contingency reserve replenished first, and then go into the refunding our other outside, our special funds, reserve funds, and then into the capital and into that method. So I think it's a good visual and a thoughtful way to move back and forth depending on what the data, what our results end up being.
Okay. So when we look at, okay, well, how did we solve this problem? As we looked forward, we did say, okay, well, we're gonna put a pause on spending the 2019 surplus, and to help us generate a surplus in 2021, which I'm fully anticipating that we will generate. And then surplus and contingency reserve plus our revised conservative revenue estimate helps us get to the 230 million, which is the amount of operating and non-operating transfers. As I mentioned, we drastically reduced our non-operating transfers, so we're back in balance, and yet we're still maintaining a $50.3 million contingency reserve. So, property tax, we had a blended projection in an increase of 4.27%. June 29th, the assessor announced our actual assessed valuation growth would be 4.72%. So that was our first revenue hurdle. It's good news, first bit of good news for 2021. Sales tax, the decrease, it's 16.6% from a impaired or reduced fiscal year in 1920, and it's a 28% reduction from what we would consider a more normal year. Transient occupancy tax is where we really cut deep, and we were assuming that hotels might not be in operation for during the summer months at all. Unfortunately, they are open. So, provided that there isn't another shutdown, we should have. I'm hopeful for some good results on the transient occupancy side. So here are kind of the revenues in total.
I think point out the TOT, Dan, a little bit.
So
these numbers are dark on that.
transient occupancy tax, we were expecting that 66.3% reduction, or 12.6 million, and sales taxes down, maybe 5.7 million, and it's. So across the rest of the board, we were looking at maybe another 20% reduction in other revenue sources. But you do notice we were counting on a 4.2% increase in property taxes, and we know that it's going to be closer to 4.7. So there's some good news. It shouldn't be as bad as we thought, provided there isn't another shutdown. On the expenditure side, again, so through some, contractual adjustments and increasing our, knowing that the capital market assumptions looking forward were a bit grim. We increased our contribution to PERS to head off potential, keep our unfunded liability from getting too far out of control. So we are still continuing to adjust that aggressively. Yet, some may be concerned that we're not moving ahead with capital projects. Grand Howell Park is moving forward. Fire Station 2 is moving forward. Although we're looking to finance that, to spread that pain over future generations a bit. And interest rates are very attractive at this time. At the same time, we're moving forward with the advanced metering system and all other water and wastewater infrastructure. So in total, you can see that the critical capital infrastructure maintenance carries on. Facilities and assessment districts continuing to move forward, parks and beaches, as streets and drains, we have significant amount. So between the new appropriations and carryovers from the prior year, we have capital projects moving forward still at $87 million. So we're not falling behind in our capital project if that is something that folks were concerned about. We haven't cut services thus far. So, what's next? There are a couple key dates coming up. We'll get our final property tax installment in mid-July. We'll know what our June transient occupancy tax in July, and we'll know our final sales tax by mid-August. So by the end of August, we should have a pretty good idea how we finished up 1920, and that will help us bridge our gap. We will continue to assess, the financial and pandemic outlook, and we plan to monitor our budget early and often. Unfortunately, just after we finish the budget, we're starting right back up with both the monitoring and budget meetings. As I mentioned, we continue to control vacancies. We're deferring non-essential capital and capital projects, and we will continue to search for more cost-effective service delivery alternatives. So no service level cuts currently, but we will have to look at that as necessary. But currently no service level cuts are contemplated, barring continued monitoring of the budget. Grace, did you want to? Is there anything you wanted to add to this slide? Otherwise, we're ready for Q&A.
No, I think we're ready for Q&A. I think we've really put ourselves into a good position through, I think, a lot of the hard work from past councils and the current council and finance committee and the staff here. And so I think we're in a very good position, as I alluded to earlier, of having just a lot of different areas and resources that we can draw on to make adjustments as we need.
Okay, are there questions from our viewers that we might pose to our panelists? I have one here that came in, and that is with regard to important project to some individuals is the harbor dredging. I noticed it was an amount of 23 million on the slide. Does this anticipate the continued efforts toward the harbor dredging?
It does.
And so we'll be able to fund our portion of that?
Well,
I think our contribution is in there, and also we have continued our work in terms of doing that pre-design work to be as shovel ready, because we are still actively engaging and lobbying at the federal level to get the additional funding there. And we know that the project is more attractive if we're ready to go on our side. So we had funded the initial pre-work through our own funds, and that still is maintained in there to continue that going. So that is still a priority, and we didn't do any reductions or are doing anything to slow that project down.
And you're assuming that the feds are going to continue to provide their portion?
Well, that's been the uphill battle, you know, and we certainly, we went through, and a lot of efforts went in by our harbor commissioners, as well as a couple of our council members as well, and going out to DC. And we were unfortunately not successful in this last round, but we do know it's a building block to get there to that next level. So we're going to continue to push on that.
So I was scrambling as you asked the question to see. So at the end of 2019, we ended with 10.6 million set aside in the Harbor and Beaches master plan available to serve as our match.
Great.
Not the full amount. I mean, not the full 10.6 million, but we do have funds set aside and reserved for the Harbor and Beaches.
Speaking of other agencies, another one is the County of Orange. I know that we, for years, have been very successful in securing Measure M funding for a number of our projects. What does Measure M funding look like today and into the future for projects that we might be considering? I'm thinking specifically if Coast Highway and Mariners Mile ever resolves the issue of whether there's going to be an additional lane, how does all that get funded?
Yeah, so we have several resources: circulation, transportation fund, gas tax, Measure M. And while there's been significant volatility in the price of gas, and then we have a marked reduction in the demand for gas, that we are anticipating some reductions to those revenue sources, but not anything significant in my view. And streets continue to be a high priority for the city. It's not something that we want to get behind on, and it's on the public works director's front of his mind that we don't skimp on those nuts and bolts projects. So
Okay, are there any other questions out there? I have one other, and that is with regard to occupancy rates. Are you in regular contact with Gary or the hotels relative to their occupancy rates?
We are, and as I understand, so their occupancy rates have been, last I heard, where we estimated, early on in the budget process, well, gosh, if we're going to be on lockdown, maybe they're 5% occupancy or less during the summer. And at least the last figure I've seen, Gary's developed a dashboard, I think, for the community as well as the city. And last I saw that the occupancy levels were in the 40 to 50% range, and the room values have held steady. So that is my understanding. We will be meeting with the chamber and polling businesses as well quarterly, and we will be in regular contact with Gary and his staff on transient occupancy tax.
Yeah, and I'd say we really appreciate that dashboard he's putting together to provide real timely statistics on what's happening on the occupancy. I think that'll be really helpful for us. as we're looking at our forecasting and where we're looking, how the numbers are going to be tracking for this in this current fiscal year.
Okay. Are there other questions out there?
I see there's one that's come in about asking if our slides would be available on our website, and I think we certainly can post these slides onto our finance department website. Dan, we can probably get that up.
Oh yeah, so we will put that on the budget page. So if you went to our URL, City of Newport, newportbeachca.gov/budget. And on that page, you should be able to see budget presentations. We'll post that there as a Speak Up Newport presentation.
And then I see another question asking about grants or funds available due to the President's emergency programs. There have been CARES Act funds that have come through. They came through from the county. We got about $770,000 for direct COVID-related expenditures, so that's certainly helpful for us in this time period. And the state budget that just got adopted also included about $1 million for COVID-related expenditures, and we're still vetting out what that is available to use for. And the other thing that was a good thing that I also for the community on the community side is that we received $2.1 million in CARES funds for business grants, which we have turned around and employed that program very rapidly, and we're in the middle of doing the disbursements of those business grants. We were able to fund approximately 300 business applications on that. So I think that's helpful. And if we have additional funding there that comes through, we certainly want to add to that as we're able to.
Well, that's great. And thank you very, very much, our city manager, Grace, and our finance director, Dan. Very, very helpful information. And hopefully our audience has appreciated a little better understanding of where we stand today. Ed, our chairman, we'll turn it back to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard. Grace and Dan, thank you very much for taking time from your busy schedule to participate today. And I think the city's lucky to have you guys at our financial helm with this pandemic crisis that we're all living through right now. And also, I'd like to offer our congratulations again to our scholarship winners. We wish them the best and success in their college careers. And please plan on joining us on August the 12th for our next webinar in this series. Please watch for our announcements on what the program will be and how to register. So until then, please be safe, and we'll see you next time.